Hello, TSC family. This is Ann Marshall, neuroeducator, and we're making a connection today in order to learn more about the science of trigger and repair. Today's science will cover both the idea of regulation and attachment. And I thank you for your grace as I learn to present to all of you in this new medium of recording and sharing out. I would encourage you to now take a moment, stop the video, and offer yourself some type of focused attention practice. Stand up and do 5 jumping jacks, do a wall sit, even just sit in silence, offer a gratitude, but stop this presentation for 1 minute and give your nervous system an opportunity to reset. All right, welcome back. I hope you experienced a change in your nervous system when you offered yourself the opportunity to connect and reset. All right, so let's do a quick review of what are triggers. Triggers are basically our hot buttons. They are events or situations that trigger us. It can be some sort of external stimulus or something that just internally sends us from a regulated to a dysregulated brain state. Please note that much of the information on triggers for this particular presentation comes from a book called Their Eyes Are Never Quiet by Dr. Laurie Desautels and Michael McKnight. It's a fantastic book if you haven't had the opportunity to check it out. It offers a lot of classroom strategies that once you read the book, you can have immediate takeaways to apply into your classroom. So where is a brain state when it is in a triggered state? You guys have seen and are familiar with the stress response chart that is being shown on the screen right now. Green is the goal, green is good, and is a regulated brain state. But the squiggly line, remember, is that line of homeostasis. And something is going to happen that moves us from that regulated to dysregulated brain state. And when we're triggered, it means that we're just functioning not in our thinking and learning brain, that we're functioning actually through our limbic system, and we are outside what we consider the window of tolerance, which is actually an entirely different presentation. You can watch a different one of these to learn more about the window of tolerance, but just the idea that we are now outside of that social engagement and we are into that fight, flight, or potentially moving toward freeze. It's important to remember that when we think about stress and triggers, that stress actually triggers our emotions, and then emotions motivate our behavior. Then our emotions activate changes in our thinking, bodily functions, and behavior, and it is our emotions that prime us for specific patterns of behavior. These changes occur instantly and automatically, and they activate our brain, many of our brain systems. What's featured on the screen now is just basically a reminder of the limbic system. And I went ahead and made a connection to the idea that conscious discipline does refer to this as the emotional brain state. The language of that limbic system are feelings and emotions. Quick review of the neuroanatomy, remembering that if we are triggered, it's because the amygdala is doing its job. It's our personal smoke detector. It's the part of our brain that asks, am I safe? And if the answer is no, it sends us into alarm alert. And so anytime we are triggered, it's because our amygdala does not feel safe. The hippocampus is where we store our memory and our learning. And especially during this time right now of a pandemic, it's especially challenging for us sometimes to access it. Our nervous system is in a paradox at this time, and it's really much more challenging for us to access things that we've already know or learned due to the pandemic that we're in. But remembering that if our amygdala is asking, am I safe? Then please know that safety happens best when in connection. And so our hippocampus, if we can't remember where we parked our car or the names of the students in our class, or we forget our lunch at home, It's because our hippocampus is experiencing a large amount of stress. And the triggers for the hippocampus often involve senses, so sight, sound, smell, and those are also contributing to our memory and connect to the hippocampus. What we know about triggers is that they're extremely powerful. Everyone has triggers, and sometimes they may even be invisible to other people. We think about the 90-second rule for triggers from Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, the idea that once we are triggered, we have an emotional reaction, potentially lasting only 90 seconds for those chemicals to be completely rinsed clean. At the end of the 90 seconds, we have a choice because we have a prefrontal cortex to either continue traveling that triggered loop or to make a different choice. And we like to choose and think about that we are going to make a response and not a reaction. Conscious discipline specifically addresses triggers in chapter 4, and when they also help illustrate the science of triggering in that chapter. Examples of triggers are now featured on your screen, and a big growth area for me this year has been to really rely on the idea that triggers aren't open for judgment. They are real and unique for each of us, and they can actually stay with us for a significant period of time. When we are aware of our triggers, then we help build our capacity and, again, our ability to respond and not react. So it's why it's really important that we teach the science of becoming aware of our triggers. Here are some questions to ask to help facilitate that awareness. We ask our students, ourselves, in a meeting with our colleagues, potentially with family members, what triggers your amygdala? What sends you into a state of not feeling safe? A good activity to incorporate into your classroom, again, or just ask of yourself, are what are my top 5 triggers? We see classroom teachers who do trigger surveys regularly with their students to say, what are the things that the top 5 triggering events or stimuli that send many of the amygdalas in this space into a lack of safety? And can we come to terms with some essential agreements to help avoid those triggering events? When you do this in a classroom, then you create a list of those big triggers. And throughout the year, you revisit that list with the goal being that you've honored and recognized triggers, you've avoided them, and now you're ready to work on the next batch of events and stimulus that trigger that particular classroom. If a particular classroom is just not, as we say, gelling and connecting, a trigger survey is also a really appropriate activity to consider. What's featured on the screen is a picture of a sample of the top of one of the trigger surveys. We have trigger surveys linked both in the TSC ICL reentry document as well as under learning links on my neuroscience website. And there are examples for our younger kids as well as for our older students. I'm also going to link a list of extension activities for adults to consider connected to middle class triggers. Moving on to the repair section of this lesson. We all know that we're all going to, as we might say, snap or become dysregulated or trigger at some point, either maybe on a family member or in front of our students. And that's okay. When we trigger, it's just called being a human being. What's important is that we are transparent and authentic with our students and say, I am so sorry. I have been triggered and I want to repair maybe I lashed out at you, or maybe I used a disrespectful tone, or I was sarcastic with the student, and it's not how I want to be with you, and it's not how I want us to treat one another in this space. So the goal to think about with triggering is it's not really eliminating the triggers. It's more about once we do trigger, how do we recover and then spend time on the repair, because those actions are what restore and preserve our relationships. So in thinking about how do we best manage our triggers, It is by accepting responsibility. Like I said, saying, oh my gosh, I'm not in my best brain state right now. I'm functioning in my brainstem. I'm really not in a place where I can think and learn and problem solve. And recognizing that a reaction that you're having might just be something that's emotional. So checking in with your body sensations. Did this experience make you feel like you now have a headache or your stomach hurts? Those are real science responses to the emotions that your body is experiencing. And then we reflect on the stimulus. We notice how we feel surrounding that triggering event. And then we decide, what do we want to do next? Well, the goal is obviously to shift from that dysregulated brain state back up to a higher brain state, or we also say the prefrontal cortex. What you're looking at on your screen now are the 4 steps that Conscious Discipline recommends for repair: composure, positive intent, empathy, and problem solving. And remembering that empathy, actually the ultimate step in empathy is achieving that compassion. So let's go back though to composure. We know that all behavior is communication. So we're not going to ask why the behavior, but we're going to ask why the pain. And so once we're triggered, it's really important that we stop and take that composure piece, which is some kind of co-regulation opportunity or self-regulation opportunity where we take a deep breath, we go on a walk, we drink some water, and we use one of our regulation strategies to help us be able to be more problem solving and in our thoughtful brain state. Then we move on to positive intent, and this is where we know that all behavior is communication and kids do well if they can. That's true for grown-ups as well. We need to be willing to see the best in others and just quit taking it personally and recognize that the behavior is not a reflection of us, or students aren't really just wired to intentionally trigger us or push our buttons, as we like to say. It might feel that way, but we need to remember and think through the lens of offering that positive intent. And then with empathy, not only are we understanding what the other person is feeling, but we're also putting ourselves in their shoes and with the goal of being compassionate about the event or the experience. And last but not least is because hopefully then we've moved back to our thinking and learning brain, we problem solve. This is where we reflect on the problem. We're able to collaborate with a family member or a student or a colleague to help come up with some solutions on this triggering event. Remember here that the goal is to not match our students' emotions, but rather calm them and co-regulate with them. And I would be remiss if I didn't remind us all that tone is the #1 trigger for all mammals. So this process has to be done with sincerity and authenticity and vulnerability, but also in a tone that conveys that we are really seeking that compassion and to help build that repair so that we can make sure the relationship is restored. So here's a little bit more on that DNA process with the empathy. Again, we want to describe and the behavior. We want to maybe even point it out to our students. What we know about students is this, that many times when they become dysregulated, they don't know what they look like, how they sound, or how they feel. And so when we describe what we're noticing connected to the triggering event and their behaviors, we actually help them to become more aware and build that understanding of when we name it, we can tame it. And that moves us on then to that end. And so that's why it's really important that this particular science supports our work. When we use that questioning tone of voice, when we help them name the emotional state that they're in, then it helps them to acknowledge, move to that A, that when we say to a student, you were really wanting the green crayon, or you were really wanting to earn the A on the test, but we understand that that didn't happen. And so then what was your response to that? Or did you have a reaction to that? We focus on the child and their experiences, and we really remember to not show our judgment for what happened in that time. So returning to our prefrontal cortex after we've triggered, I mentioned this several times, it's through co-regulation. Remember that need for co-regulation never goes away. And so we have to be mindful of our own bodies, getting in proximity with a student, but not forcing ourselves, such as eye contact. That can be powerful, but maybe not in every situation. So we have to be aware of the behaviors and notice the behaviors of the student, using our soothing tone, breathing with them. Remember, we share neurobiology like a lending library. So when we just even move to proximity, we can help start regulating our students. Being a thermostat, not a thermometer, we want to set the temperature of the room and keep it cool and comfortable, because once it gets hot, it's really hard to return to the homeostasis efficiently. We offer those calming corners or even all school amygdala reset stations. And we use touch points with checking in. So we check in, whether that's with our thumbs up or through a survey or informal observations, but those check-in practices are really important. So these are our big three, the favorite three questions when you experience someone in your classroom or a colleague or a family member that is triggered and dysregulated. We know when we pose these three questions, it immediately helps to begin the regulation process. What do you need? How can I help? And what can we do to make this better? Many of us now wear those three questions on a small card inside our lanyards. If you'd like one of those cards and don't have one, please email me and I'd be happy to send you one. These three questions are really powerful because they switch our questioning as the adult from what happened to you or what's wrong with you to how can we support them and encourage that co-regulation. Featured on the screen now are just some of the resources that were featured in this lesson. I made reference to Dr. Lori Desautel's and Michael McKnight's book, Eyes Are Never Quiet. We touched on Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor's 90-second rule. Remember that she has a fantastic TED Talk if you're curious, where she explains that even further. We made reference to conscious discipline connections, since that is an additional brain-aligned framework that we're rolling out here in the TSC. So as we close today, remember that the neuroscience website is free, available. Sarah Margison does help me to keep it current and reflective of the work that's going on in our district right now, as well as the best practices aligning to brain-aligned and adversity responsive research. There's my email featured. I am on Twitter, mostly featuring the work of the neuroscience framework across the TSC, or if I'm in professional development, I'll put that out on Twitter. And then my Facebook page is where I share a lot of the applied educational neuroscience research. So as always, I encourage you to make a connection with me. Let me know how I might serve you, because I think it's really important that we remember that we are better together. So in closing, it is my honor and privilege to work with you and serve you in this way. And please allow me to extend to you my well wish. My well wish is this: may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you be happy, and thanks for sharing your time here with me today.